He's the president of a nation, yet the French embassy refused him entry on his own soil. What happened next stunned diplomats across the world. Ibrahim Traoré didn't argue, he didn't beg. He gave one bold order that shut the entire embassy down. The moment shocked the West and empowered Africa. It was a quiet, hot morning in Ouagadougou, and traffic moved slowly through the dusty streets. At the corner of a main road, a young man stepped out of an old black SUV, wearing a loose shirt, sandals, and a faded cap pulled low. He looked like any ordinary Burkinabe citizen, calm, quiet, not trying to draw attention. But this man was not ordinary. It was President Ibrahim Traoré. He had chosen to visit the French embassy that morning, alone and without an escort. No sirens, no red carpet, no flashing lights. He often moved this way, simple, low profile, unpredictable. He believed in facing the world the way his people lived, with humility and strength. The purpose of his visit was serious. He wanted to deliver a personal diplomatic message directly, not through a letter, not through ministers. It involved French military activities, recent intelligence reports, and sensitive national matters. He felt it was better to handle it face to face. As he walked toward the embassy gate, 2 French security guards looked at him from their booth. One of them, tall and pale-skinned, narrowed his eyes. The other chuckled and leaned back in his chair. They didn't salute. They didn't ask for ID. Instead, one of them raised a hand and barked, "No entry. This building is not for street visitors. Go around. Make an appointment." Traoré stood still. He didn't speak right away. "I have a message for the ambassador," he said calmly. The guard scoffed. "Then use email. This is not a market." The second guard added sarcastically, "Unless you're bringing lunch or a delivery, move along." People passing by slowed down, watching. No one knew what was happening. No one realized that the man being turned away like a beggar was the commander-in-chief of the nation. And Traoré, he didn't argue. He didn't shout. He just pulled out his phone and made one short call. The phone was at his ear for less than 30 seconds. Ibrahim Traoré spoke in a calm voice, almost like he was ordering breakfast, not reacting to a major insult. He didn't raise his tone, he didn't mention his title, he simply said, "It's me. They denied me entry. You know what to do." Then he hung up. The 2 French guards were still smirking, unaware. One of them leaned against the gatepost and shook his head. "These people," he muttered, "they think they can walk in anywhere." Traoré gave them a long look, not angry, not offended, just quiet, almost disappointed. Then without a word he turned and began walking slowly back toward the car. His footsteps stirred dust on the ground, but the silence he left behind was heavier than any speech. Across the street, a fruit seller who had seen the whole thing whispered to her neighbor, "That's the president. They just sent away the president." Her friend's eyes widened. "Impossible. He had no guards, no suit." "Exactly," the woman replied. "That's how he moves." Meanwhile, at the Burkina Faso Ministry of Foreign Affairs, phones began ringing. At the Presidential Security Office, radio signals lit up. At the Ouagadougou airport, incoming flight protocols were reviewed and canceled. And at the French embassy itself, things started to change fast. Within 15 minutes, 3 military trucks pulled up to the street just outside the embassy gates. Burkinabe soldiers in full uniform calmly stepped out, lined up silently and waited. They didn't speak. They didn't aim weapons. They just stood strong, disciplined, and unshakable. Inside the embassy, staff members rushed to windows. The guards who had denied Traoré's entry looked around nervously. One of them mumbled, "What's going on?" That's when one of the embassy's top French officials came running from the main building, red-faced and sweating. "Who did you just turn away?" he demanded. The guard stuttered. Some local guy, no appointment, looked like nobody. The official stared at him in horror. That was the president of Burkina Faso. Inside the French embassy, panic exploded like thunder in a quiet room. Staff rushed around, Phones rang nonstop and the atmosphere turned from relaxed to terrified in minutes. The ambassador himself, a man named Jean-Pierre Martel, came storming down the hallway, his tie half loose and his face pale. "Where is he now?" he barked. "He left, just walked away," one assistant replied. The ambassador slapped his hand on the table. "You let the President of the Republic walk away from his own embassy." "Mondur?" the guards tried to explain. "He had no ID, no bodyguards, no appointment. You don't need an appointment to speak to a man who controls the entire country," Martel snapped. "You don't turn away a lion because he's wearing a sheep's coat." Meanwhile, outside the embassy, more military vehicles began to arrive. Not aggressively, just parked, nearby watching. The soldiers didn't move. They didn't point guns. They simply stood as a silent warning. You disrespected the head of state. Now feel the weight of that mistake. That same hour at Burkina Faso's presidential office, Traoré entered his office and said just 3 words to his staff. "Close the embassy." The order flew across the country in less than 10 minutes. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a formal diplomatic letter was typed, signed, sealed, and delivered by hand. Due to continued disrespect and security concerns, the French embassy in Ouagadougou is to be temporarily closed. All French staff must suspend operations until further notice. Within an hour, the national television station interrupted its programming. A breaking news banner appeared. President Traoré orders closure of French embassy after disrespect incident. The streets erupted. Motorbike riders beeped their horns. Market vendors clapped their hands. Young men lifted posters of Traoré into the air, shouting, "Dignity first, respect or leave." Across social media, the news spread like fire. The video of Traoré being blocked at the gate, captured quietly by someone on the street, was now being shared in every corner of Africa. By evening, Burkina Faso was on fire with pride, not with violence, but with voices. The people, rich or poor, young or old, stood united in one powerful message. We may not have gold in our pockets, but we have dignity in our hearts. At universities, students held emergency discussions under mango trees, calling Traoré's move a lesson in silent power. In markets, women danced and sang, calling him the son of Sankara. Street artists sprayed fresh graffiti on walls, bold letters reading, "Respect Africa or pack your bags." Meanwhile, the French embassy scrambled behind closed doors. Staff were told to halt all public appearances. Vehicles were parked. Security was doubled. The ambassador tried calling the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. No one picked up. In Paris, French officials were in damage control. A late-night press conference was called where a spokesperson tried to explain it was a misunderstanding. "We deeply value our relationship with Burkina Faso." But in Ouagadougou, the people were no longer interested in diplomatic words. They had seen the truth with their own eyes. A president who didn't need weapons, speeches, or threats to defend his people. Just one phone call. In the middle of it all, Traoré remained quiet. No interviews, no celebrations, no speeches. He sat in his office working as usual, signing documents, reviewing military updates, planning rural infrastructure, as if nothing had happened. But something had happened. The balance of power had shifted. Traoré's silence became his loudest statement yet, and across the continent other African leaders were watching. Because this wasn't just a reaction to disrespect, it was a reminder that Africa has changed, that Burkina Faso is awake, that leadership isn't in uniforms or luxury cars, it's in knowing when to walk away and when to make the world follow. The morning after the embassy was shut down, the streets of Ouagadougou looked different. No protest, no violence, just a quiet, heavy pride sitting in the air like morning mist. Newspapers sold out in hours. Headlines screamed in bold letters. Traoré closes embassy with one call. President walks. Nation stands. Burkina Faso teaches France a lesson. In villages far from the capital, places without electricity or signal, elders gathered under trees to hear the story told by mouth. One man stood in front of his community and said, "Yesterday they closed the gates on our son. Today he closed the gates on their power." In high schools, Teachers stopped their lessons to discuss what had happened. Students who often dreamed of escaping to Europe now raised their hands and asked, "Why should we go where we're not respected? Maybe it's time we build here." In neighboring African countries, the reaction was electric. In Mali, a crowd marched peacefully through Bamako, holding signs that read, "We stand with Traoré." In Niger, youth groups shared photos of the incident, with the caption, "Africa is rising one voice at a time." In Senegal, a famous radio host said on air, "This is not about France, it's about the mindset. For the first time, we're seeing a leader who doesn't shout, but when he moves, the earth shakes." Even inside France, African diaspora communities praised Traoré's calm power. A viral clip showed a French, African teenager saying they used to ignore our countries. Now they're checking twice before opening their mouths. But back in Ouagadougou, in a quiet part of the city, President Ibrahim Traoré sat at a round table with his advisors. No celebration, no ego, just plans. He pointed at a map. "Let's invest more in local gold refining. Let's review every foreign company, and let's protect every chief, every teacher, every farmer the way I protect this chair I sit in." Someone asked him, "Mr. President, do you want to address the people?" He shook his head. "They already understand my job is not to make noise. My job is to build something that speaks louder than words." He stood, adjusted his sleeves, and walked out. And as he passed through the courtyard, a young soldier saluted him and said, "You didn't close just an embassy, sir. You opened our eyes." Traoré nodded once. That was all. 3 days after the French embassy was closed, its building stood still, quiet, gates locked, curtains drawn. Once seen as a symbol of influence, it now looked like a frozen monument, a reminder that times had changed. The flag still flew, but the message it carried had shifted. Birken Bay citizens passed by and stared, not with hate, but with understanding. A little boy on a bicycle stopped in front of the embassy gate and asked his father, "Is that the place where they told the president to go away?" The father nodded. "Yes." And he went. But they're the ones who had to leave after. At the airport, footage emerged of French diplomats boarding planes back to Paris. No press, no send-off, just quiet exits. Some looked down, others looked around, confused at how quickly respect had slipped through their fingers. A few tried to speak to reporters, but the people weren't interested in their words anymore. The real story was already written, and it was written by a man who said almost nothing. President Ibrahim Traoré never gave a public statement. He never called a press conference. He didn't need to. His actions had done the talking, not just for Burkina Faso, but for a continent that has long been treated like a guest on its own soil. Across Africa, leaders began reviewing foreign contracts. Ministries looked again at security deals, mining permits, embassy access, and who really holds the power in partnerships. One by one, quiet changes began. Back in Ouagadougou, a school teacher printed out a photo of Traoré walking away from the embassy and pinned it to the blackboard. She wrote in chalk beneath it, "Power is not in shouting. It is in knowing when to walk and when to close the door behind you." In the countryside, an elder gathered young men beneath a tree and told the story with pride. They closed the door on our president because he wore no suit, had no guard, and made no noise. But now they know the ones who make the most noise aren't always the ones who lead. Sometimes real power wears dust on its shoes. And across the land, even without a single word, the silence of Ibrahim Traoré became the loudest sound in Burkina Faso's. Respect is not requested, it's expected. And when it's denied, especially to the leader of a sovereign nation on his own land, the consequences can change history. That's exactly what happened when President Ibrahim Traoré was turned away at the gates of the French embassy in Burkina Faso. No explanation, no apology, just a silent, deliberate refusal that sent one clear message: disrespect. But Traoré is not the kind of leader who tolerates humiliation. He doesn't plead for access, he doesn't knock twice. And in that defining moment, he reminded The world that African leadership is no longer at the mercy of foreign institutions operating with colonial arrogance. Within hours, the decision was made. The order was signed. The gates that refused to open for him were locked permanently from the other side. President Ibrahim Traoré shut down the French embassy in Ouagadougou, sending shockwaves through diplomatic circles from Paris to Washington. This was not just an act of retaliation. It was a statement of principle. For decades, embassies like France's had operated with unchecked power across the continent, often functioning as silent strongholds of influence. Traoré's move wasn't about one incident. It was about drawing a line. A bold declaration that Burkina Faso would no longer allow foreign powers to disrespect its leadership and sovereignty. His words were clear and unshakable. If you cannot respect the presidency of Burkina Faso, you do not belong on Burkina Bay soil. That single sentence ignited a storm. Some in the West called it dangerous, a breakdown in diplomacy. But across Africa, it was hailed as heroic. Citizens took to the streets, not in protest, but in celebration. Chants echoed through the capital, "We are not your colony." Social media lit up with hashtags of support, declaring it a turning point in post-colonial history. And perhaps it was. Because Traoré didn't just close a building, he opened a new chapter. One where African nations reclaim their space, their dignity, and their power. Where embassies are no longer emboldened to act as foreign command centers, but held accountable like any institution on native land. Other African leaders took notice. Conversations began in neighboring countries. If Burkina Faso could stand up to France, why couldn't they? Traoré, once viewed as a rebel leader, was now being studied as a blueprint for sovereignty in the modern world. He did not threaten war. He did not ignite violence. He simply reminded the world that the age of silent submission was over. The embassy may be closed, but the message is wide open. Africa is no longer knocking politely. It is walking through its own doors and locking those that no longer serve its future.